Okay, recording is in progress. Hi, everybody. My name is Cynthia Carlisle, and presenting with me today is also Ron Vaught, controller, an accountant 4 at City of Portland. And today we're doing our part 3 training on internal controls. So just to have a quick refresher, this is a little bit of this diagram shows a roadmap of where we're going today. It talks about the different components, objectives, and organizational structure. So starting from the top down, going over those 5 components. Oh, Simber joined us. Is control environment, risk assessment, control activities, and information and communication. And finally, monitoring. And on the top side, we have the categories of objectives, which is operations, reporting, and compliance. So each one of these components is going to touch on all 3 of these objectives. And on the right-hand side, we have the different levels of organizational structure. And this goes over function, operating unit, division, and essentially rolls up into the entity. And what that says is basically everybody at the entity has an important role in the internal control structure, whether you're in management and you're part of that tone at the top, or whether you're a staff person and you're a part of adhering to those processes that we have in place. So with that said, we will go ahead and jump into where we left off last time. All right. So where we left off in part 2 is principle 10. And just as a reminder, principle 10 actually maps into control activities. So this is one of 3 attributes, or not attributes, but principles. Thank you. Principles within this particular component. So within this particular principle, we have the following attributes regarding the design of control activities for control activities. And that is, of course, always as a response to objectives and risks. So this entails of policies, procedures, techniques, and mechanisms that enforce management's directives. And design here is going to be of the appropriate type and also the different control activities at various levels. So the appropriate type of controls can be either preventive or detective, and either automated or manual. And just some quick examples of preventive type checks. So it could be like a credit check, a required authorization signature, data entry checks, physical control checks, anything essentially that would prevent improper data entry or improper authorization. So before it could even get recorded or any damage could get done, the control is designed to prevent that. Examples of detective controls would be something that is designed to search for and identify errors after they've already occurred. So in real life, where we do this is, for example, balance sheet reconciliations or other types of reconciliations. On a larger scale, we also have internal audits or inventory counts. And let's see. Oh yeah. So then as for the design of the control activities, these have to be designed for appropriate coverage. And they also have to be designed at the entity level and at the transaction control activity level. And that's where the segregation of duties essentially plays in. Did you have something? You're just going to interrupt me when you're ready to jump in, right?
Okay.
Okay. So let's see. Other types of control activities include top-level reviews of actual performance, reviews at the functional activity level, management of human capital. It covers so many different aspects of the entity. So also controls over information processing, physical controls over vulnerable assets. So especially over like laptops or like servers, a lot of times those will be like locked behind door and key or kept behind door and lock. Establishment and review of performance measures, And those should be changing too as various things change within the entity. Segregation of duties, which we've covered, accurate and timely recording of transactions, which is important because if things wait too long, there's much more opportunity for making mistakes there. Restrictions to and accountability for resources. So having some sort of way to keep track of assets, especially like laptops. And I think about like, since we've been working from home, like the hybrid, the big move during COVID to working from home, that was probably a really big aspect of tracking those different vulnerable assets, and appropriate documentation of transactions and internal control. Okay. At the entity level, so entity level controls have a very pervasive effect on internal control. These may include controls related to risk assessment, basically the 5 components, and service organizations, management override, and monitoring. So transaction control activities are built directly into operational processes to support the entity in achieving its objectives and addressing risks. Transactions tend to relate to the financial process. So, and when I think about this, I think about like our software, like SAP, how there are certain controls built into it so that transactions occur in a certain, like not pattern, but in a certain flow to ensure accuracy and that they're authorized and all these different things that we have to think about.
Yeah, we have workflows for accounts payable, accounts receivable, and a lot of other processes within SAP, and they tend to be flowcharted out. For procurement with P cards, issues the P cards, so they have to they get an application that for somebody to have a P card, and then the person then has to go take a test and do some studying and verify that they understand the rules, and they get issued a P card. And then procurement is also involved as transactions happening at the end of the month. They are part of the process where you download from the bank and then post all the transactions to SAP. And then accounting is also involved in that they're going in and looking at transactions that make sure that they comply with the rules and issuing strikes to card holders and approvers if they violate the rules, and then potentially taking their card away.
So right there, I picked up on a few different controls that you mentioned. So there's the preventive control, because we're making sure that people are educated and understand how the program works, so as to prevent errors. And then you mentioned at the end of the month, they do a reconciliation. So they'll download what expenses went through the bank and then reconcile them to probably some sort of authorization log or something. So there's that, the detective component. And then with accounting, you mentioned the compliance aspect. So that would also be detective, right? Because at that point, if there was an error, it's already occurred. So the idea is that you have a disinterested, maybe a party that's like removed from the procurement process to do the reconciliation as well. And for accountability and to correct those things in a timely manner. Very nice. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so let's see. Design controls we're still on at various levels. When choosing between entity level and transaction control activities, management evaluates the level of precision needed. Of course, there's always the cost-benefit trade-off. In determining that level of precision, management needs to evaluate the purpose of the control activity. So is it going to be preventive or detective? The level of aggregation. So a control that is performed at a more granular level is more precise, but generally also more costly, versus one that's performed at a higher level. Consistency of performance. This is a control that is performed routinely and consistently. That's going to be more precise than when done sporadically. and correlation to relevant operational processes. And that is a control that is directly related to the operational process is more likely to prevent than one done indirectly. So I think probably, I mean, auditors would be a little bit more like indirect, but they, I mean, they do it like on a completely different basis, like on a test basis, but
Yeah.
versus like what we were just talking about, like with, I suppose, like within procurement, that would be more of a direct, like a directly related to that operational process.
Yeah. So auditing comes in handy, but they are looking for things that are material, which for us is a really huge number, up in the millions. So it's conceivable that an audit will catch a fraud, but it doesn't happen on a regular basis. It's
And it's not the most effective anyway, when you look at
the tip lines are seem to be the most effective at the moment. So
which we'll actually get to that as well.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what we think about when we think about like level of aggregation. Materiality is a consideration of that for that as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So jumping into segregation of duties. Segregation of duties are incompatible duties that should be segregated and were not practical. Design an alternative control activity to address the risk. So the 4 different types of functions to separate are authorization, custody, record keeping, and reconciliation. By separating these 4 functions, you help prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. You can help address the risk of management override. And segregation alone does not, or even when you have segregation, it doesn't really address the risk of collusion, which I can't think of any control that would. I think that's always a control risk. Collusion being when 2 people essentially decide to together collude and override control.
Or it could be more like an example I was using last week with the county road department, where it was everybody that worked for the road department plus all the supervisors were all involved in the collusion. But the only thing you could hope for there is one of the parties getting pissed off and blowing the whistle. So that would be a way that one might get uncovered. But having all 4 of those things, like we had a school district that we audited, and the school clerk was able to apply for and get a credit card in the school name. She then had custody of the credit cards because she received them. She did all the record keeping.
Oh, that's bad news.
And she did all the reconciliations. So over about a 6-year period, she stole $500,000.
Oh my God, that's.
And it was all gambling is what her thing was. But she would just kind of max out she had like 5 or 6 credit cards, and she would max them all out every month and then come in and pay it. And the way that one got caught is she was sick, and the school superintendent started going through drawers or something and started finding all these credit card statements that she didn't know about.
Very interesting.
Yep.
Yeah, it's tough in smaller organizations. It's especially tougher to have this segregation of duties because you tend to have like one person that wears multiple hats. Whereas like in larger organizations, it's easier to separate them out. But yeah, I think one of the ways that they suggest, I guess, kind of testing whether people are following those procedures is to have like a swap of duties. Because a lot of times fraud is caught when someone is out sick or whatever, if you have that like coworker who never takes any vacation, that sort of thing. It can be kind of a red flag.
Or never allows a particular body of work to be done while they are on vacation.
Mm-hmm.
Like I worked for Gallatin County, and the city treasurer there, or the county treasurer there, had one type of revenue stream that he insisted that only he do that work, and no matter whether he was on vacation or not. If he was on vacation, nothing related to that body of work happened. But again, he had a gambling addiction and was he had like a lapping scheme going where he was periodically take a chunk of money, and then the next one that came in, he would apply it to the one that he'd stolen, apply it to that bill, and then so anyway,
that catches up with you after a while.
Eventually a lapping scheme
will collapse
under its own weight.
Okay. So on to Principle 11, still under control activities. The attributes under this principle are the management's design of the information system, appropriate control activities, information technology infrastructure, security management, and information technology acquisition, development, and maintenance. So a little bit more about the design. Obviously, every single one of these control activities, all the risks are designed by management to respond to the objectives and risks. The point here is to obtain and process information to meet each operational processes information requirements. Again, if you think about it like in terms of different functions, information system consists of people, processes, data, and technology organized to obtain, communicate, or dispose of information. This can be both manual or automatic through technology, and may enhance internal control over security and confidentiality of information by appropriately restricting access. So some of that would be like passwords, or if you have like a certain system that only certain people have access to, if an employee leaves, making sure that they no longer have access to that, or if they go to a different role, that their role is appropriately updated in the access log. And some of the objectives include completeness, accuracy, and validity. So this ties into some of management assertions. Completeness meaning that transactions are recorded and not over or understated. Accuracy has to do with transactions being recorded in the correct amount, in the right account, and on a timely basis. And validity means that recorded transactions represent economic events that actually occurred and were executed according to the prescribed procedures. Okay. So the two main types of control activities are going to be general and application. And at the general level, we're thinking entity-wide system and applications levels. So we're talking about policies and procedures that apply to the entity as a whole. These facilitate proper operation of information systems, including security management, logical and physical access, configuration, segregation of duties, and contingency planning. That's an interesting one. I was wondering if you had anything to say about that. And then the other type are application. And sometimes these are referred to as business process controls. So we're getting a little bit more granular here. And this has to do with controls incorporated directly into the computer applications to achieve some of that validity, completeness, accuracy, and confidentiality objectives. And these also include controls over input processing, output, master file, interface, data management, system controls. So a lot of what that means is, if you think about it in terms of like a flow chart, essentially just the process of how something goes, data goes from input being saved to a certain file, like a subledger file, and then it rolls up into another ledger file and the different reports that you can pull at different times. Just as like a short example.
So contingency planning, well, we will refer to it as COOP planning. And Summer knows way more than I do because she worked at PBM, which is our emergency management group. So right now, most of our servers are based in Hillsborough at a company in Hillsborough, but then they're backed up to a company in Denver. Most of our check printing is done in Phoenix, but then if Phoenix is offline for some reason, it switches to Minneapolis, and then if Minneapolis is also down, then it switches to Atlanta. But Summer and Sheila are finance leads at the ECC, the Emergency Coordination Center. So if we go into emergency coordination mode, which will probably happen tonight with the snowstorm and sub-zero temperatures, they have to get involved and work the financial logistics side. There are other people that handle the physical logistics of like setting up shelters where people can go and get warm, and providing food and all that sort of stuff. But they provide the financial aspects of it. Mostly for these type of events, they've been working remotely. But when we had both that last weather event and it was coupled with the union strike, they actually went to the ECC and manned the ECC. And I don't know if probably none of you have been there. It's a pretty cool room. It's just a great big giant room with TVs all around, like you see in the TV shows. And there are different sections throughout the room. Everybody with their own responsibilities, and then there's meeting rooms all around that room where leadership can go and huddle and make decisions.
Oh wow, that's pretty sophisticated.
Yeah, it is very. So anyway, we do a lot of contingency planning. There are things I think we need to work on to improve, but
curious how often that gets updated. Is that, or at least like looked at?
It should be, but it's been a while since we updated ours. But every bureau has a COOP plan and has a responsibility, and there's a software system where everybody enters their COOP planning information in there. So it's got the names and contact information, and like I've got in my backpack, I have everybody's phone numbers and contact information. So if we go into emergency mode, you all may not be doing accounting, but you may all get put to work doing something.
Thank goodness.
So anyway, it's a fairly sophisticated thing, and then there's a COOP planning meetings on a regular basis, like once a month.
Oh wow. Okay.
And periodically we do desktop where they pick some particular scenario. Like back when I started, but they did a fairly sophisticated one where they're actually, it wasn't just a desktop one. If the event then was if somebody had set off a dirty bomb in the middle of the city, and there were actually people that were playing dead people and injured people, and it was a fairly sophisticated one. I don't think we've done one that sophisticated since then.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Oh,
So anyway, there is a lot of contingency planning that's happening, but it's something we have to constantly be working on and being aware of.
mhm.
And more worried about lately with the earthquakes in Turkey, and seems like you need those little reminders every now and then that
Mhm.
there is the potential for events to happen that would require us to
Mhm.
dramatically change what we do and how we do it. But we got like paper purchase orders and checks sitting out at the ECC. There's FEMA software to do accounting if we needed to and couldn't get access to SAP. So, and they have ham radio set up there, and they've got solar panels, and it's pretty self-contained.
Oh,
And there's a park right next door, and there's tents. So in the event of the big one, we would be setting up tents in the park next door, and everybody is staffing. That's where they would sleep and eat, and then all across the city, there's parks where there are teams of people. Some are what I can't remember the name of those groups.
Beacon sites.
Beacon sites.
Yeah.
So there are beacon sites where people would staff, and they're spread out all across the city, so that if you're in need of help, you can go there and connect with people.
The beacon sites have like some of the radio and tools. The folks that would staff it are the neighborhood emergency teams. That's a volunteer-based kind of community-led effort and those folks are trained by PBEM staff and various things like and then they have that equipment in those beacon sites. So they are trained on if a building falls down, how to pick up really heavy things, and they have some of the equipment to do that. They're trained in how to put a fire out and trained in some basics first aid. So one of the facts many people don't know is in natural disasters, the most common person who's going to save your life is your neighbor. So it's building on that reality we've seen in history.
Mm-hmm.
wow, that is so sophisticated. I was not expecting that level of detail. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
Mhm.
Yeah, we should do a field trip out to the ECC sometime.
Yeah, that would be great.
And it's right next to Vaught, which is 911. It's two buildings just are interconnected.
I have to give a couple shout outs. One to Carmen Merlot, who took the Office of Emergency Management, made its own bureau, and managed to get a facility built in an environment where we can barely even get facilities maintained. And also to Jeremy Van Kuren, who took that neighborhood emergency team from almost entirely an all white male over 60 group to an incredibly diverse and young. We have, I think he was developing a Spanish speaking emergency team, like entirely Spanish speaking. We've trained houseless folks in as nets, which had never happened. And the demographics have just entirely shifted in the last 6 to 10 years. And you can almost point it entirely to Jeremy and his work.
Oh, impressive.
Yep.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Thank you, Summer, for participating in that conversation as well.
Of course.
Okay. Just a few more slides left here. Now we're going to be talking about, let's see, the design of the information technology infrastructure. So the information technology requires an infrastructure in which to operate communication networks for linking technologies, computing resources for applications to operate, and electricity to power the systems, essentially everything that Ron just covered. I was especially fascinated to hear about the solar panels, because yeah, in an emergency situation, you may not necessarily have power to run any of your systems. Management
Another
continues.
one that I've never seen in any other building is gray water usage. So if you go there, the toilets are a little dirtier than you'd expect because they actually are, the water is from the roof, from rainwater, and kind of filtered slightly and used in the non-potable places you can in the building.
Oh, I love that.
Mm.
Huh. Thank you. Let's see. Management continues to evaluate changes in the use of systems and designs new control activities when changes are needed. Maintenance includes backup and recovery procedures, as well as a continuity of operation plans, as Ron and Summer shared. Thank you, Summer.
That's what COOP stands for, is continuity of operations.
Oh, continuity of COOP. COO.
COOP.
P procedures? Continuity of operations procedures?
Yeah, this on the last slide. Plan. Continuity of operations.
Oh, gotcha. COOP. Okay. COOP. Gotcha. Thank you. Okay, so as with all other controls, management designs the control activities over security management. Here, the objectives have more to do with confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The definition of confidentiality here means data, reports, and other outputs are safeguarded against unauthorized access. Integrity means that the information is safeguarded against improper modification or destruction. Availability means data, reports, and other information are readily available to users when needed. And design control activities are designed to protect from inappropriate access. They should evaluate threats, both internal and external, and restrict access to only what is needed to do one's job. And that's for our protection as well. I know I always really want to make sure I don't have access to anything I don't need, for my own protection and for the protection of my colleagues as well. So just another reminder how this really impacts everybody within the organization.
Yeah. And there's a list of SAP roles that's associated with each of your positions. And ideally, that's just what you need, nothing more, and doesn't give you the ability to do something you shouldn't be doing. There are some instances where, like the debt team, I think is the one I can think of, where it's a small team and we do make some exceptions there for giving them some roles that they would normally not have, but I have to sign off on those every year.
So it requires some level of oversight. Like the only way that you could really truly override those controls is if like you and the debt manager were in collusion or something, because it still requires two different authorizations.
Yep.
Gotcha. Okay, I'm so sad. We're almost there. Almost done. Okay. Design of information technology acquisition, development, and maintenance. So management also designs controls regarding that, and they use a systems development lifecycle framework, which outlines specific phases and documenting requirements, approvals, and checkpoints. And at times, management may acquire through packaged software from vendors. So stuff that already has kind of controls built into it. And the way that they do this is through policies. Some of the attributes under this principle 12, which actually reminds me, yeah, this is the last one under control activities. Some of the attributes under Principle 12 are the documentation of responsibilities through policies, around setting objectives and related risks and control activity design implementation of operating effectiveness, the periodic review of control activities. So periodically reviewing those policies and procedures with the change in, for example, like one of the biggest examples is like COVID, how that totally changed the landscape internally and externally. Procedures and related control activities for continued relevance and effectiveness. So anytime you have a big shift or a big change, a change in your human capital needs or requirements, that certainly merits it. Or like we have an upcoming internal restructuring. That'll certainly be an opportunity to review control activities related to.
So there's this organization-wide change with moving to city manager form of government. Or implementing S4, which will be a totally different ERP system than what we have now. We're getting ready to, before that, we'll work on Ariba, which will change our procurement systems. And each one of those types of changes, you got to go in and reevaluate your policies and your controls to make sure that they're still relevant. And
I would imagine not just for the people directly using it, but any other extensions from there that involve like a reconciliation process or a sign-off process or something related to that.
Yeah, and sign-offs is a good example of how we adapted with the pandemic. Pre-pandemic, everything was just you had to do a physical signature. Or now use DocuSign or the Adobe signature type, and there's a couple different types of Adobe signature things. But so yeah, we've dramatically adjusted how the signature processes work.
Yeah, another reason why you should always lock your computer as a control. In theory, somebody could nefariously like go in and use your computer to sign off on something that you didn't intend to. That's common, but still.
Yeah. In Missoula, when the police first got their computers and email, that was one of the things that they would do. Is that an officer walked away from his computer and didn't lock it, one of his buddies would jump on his computer and send emails out. That was embarrassing.
I've heard of that, or of colleagues will mess with their mouse and like switch the left click or the right click or something. That's not as nefarious, but still just a friendly reminder to always lock your computer when you walk away.
Yes.
Okay, so now we're on information and communication, which has to do with the fourth control activity of information and communication. So we're going to be talking about these three different principles here. So this has to do with the entity having access to relevant and reliable communication related to internal and external events. So the three principles are mapped here, and that is that management should use quality information to achieve entities' objectives. Management should internally communicate the necessary quality information to achieve those objectives, and also externally communicate the necessary quality information to receive said objectives. So Principle 14 talks about using quality information, and the attributes here include identification of information requirements needed, and addressing the risks, always considering the internal and external users, also considering relevant data from reliable sources. So reliable internal and external sources provide data that are reasonably free of error and bias and obtained on a timely basis. Data processed into quality information based on those reliable sources of data mean that the quality of the data is appropriate, current, complete, accurate, accessible, and always on a timely basis. And the reason that that's so important is because a lot of times this information is used by people in leadership to make very important decisions. So you want to make sure that they have the best data at their fingertips. If something isn't provided to them on a timely basis, then their decisions may not necessarily reflect the needs of the entity in real time, essentially.
Yeah. And so for us, we all work at a fairly high level with financial reporting, but we also have a tremendous amount of stuff in SAP that is designed for management reporting, where it's slicing and dicing things down to original idea between a cost object or a cost center was that would tell you what a manager was doing. It's not quite, it's kind of evolved. So like originally we had a cost center for reporting and one for operations and one for systems and training. But now we're just have one for accounting. So the cost object is associated with me, not with Kevin and Dean and Summer. So
still a little bit higher level.
Yeah, but then we have internal orders and WBS elements and functional areas, which is what we budget by is the functional area.
So each element is designed to capture different information so that like people at higher levels are able to use the relevant information to make decisions on a timely basis.
Yep.
Right. Okay, so continuing with principle 14, we need to be able to communicate throughout the entity, and that means down, across, up, and around all the reporting lines to all the different levels, which means you may need separate lines of communication like whistleblower and ethics hotlines. I think you started talking about some of those previously. And appropriate methods of communication are based on thinking about who is your audience, what the nature of your communication is, availability, cost, and legal or regulatory requirements. Of course, not everything can be said. Sometimes there's restrictions outside of that. Did you want to say anything about that, or?
No, it's kind of continuation of the different types of reporting that we do, whether it's management accounting or financial accounting. So
short and sweet. Okay, principle 14, communicating externally. Some of the attributes here, this has to do with communication with external parties. External parties could be your suppliers, contractors, service organizations, regulators, external auditors, government entities, investors, or the general public. Incoming communication includes information about risks, changes, and issues impacting internal controls. Okay, some appropriate methods of communication. So when considering appropriate methods of communication, again, think about your audience. That is, who is the intended recipient. When you think about the nature of information, it's the purpose and type of information. Availability, I was curious about this one. This means that it's available to the audience when needed. So again, kind of going back to that principle of providing information on a timely basis. Cost, meaning you need to think about the resources it's going to take to communicate that information. And of course, any other legal or regulatory requirements. And this can be done in written form, electronic, hard copy, or face-to-face.
Yeah, well, we need to be expanding that through. It's dashboards are becoming more popular. And with S4, sounds like we'll have the kind of the flexibility to like build dashboards and tie them directly into SAP. So it's displaying to the public or whoever's has access to that dashboard on the web, real-time information. And that, I think, needs to be our long-term goal, is to get to the more of a graphic, just real-time reporting of information that's relevant to the citizens and the elected officials.
Yeah, graphics are great because they can communicate a large amount of data kind of just visually in a snapshot. And,
yeah. But yeah, I doubt that anybody on the council has ever read that ACPR.
That 400-page report, hard to believe.
Well, if you know you know how to read it, there's a lot of really good information in there. But not many people know how to read it.
True. Okay. All right. Finally, we are at the fifth and final component, monitoring. We have two principles under this component. Management should establish and operate monitoring activities over the internal control system and evaluate the results and immediately or remediate as soon as possible those identified internal control deficiencies. Okay, so the performance of monitoring activities, some of these attributes include the establishment of a baseline. And a baseline is a current state of an internal control system compared to design. And the difference or the delta between the criteria and the current status is what they would be evaluating. And you can reduce that delta by either changing the design or improving the operating effectiveness. Another attribute is the internal control system has ongoing monitoring built into its operations. So yeah, kind of like whether it's like larger milestones or at a more granular level. And finally, evaluation of results, which consists of evaluating and documenting results of that monitoring, using evaluation to determine the effectiveness of the system, and identifying changes to the system due to change in general or the entity environment, other factors. And finally, Principle 17, evaluate issues and remediate deficiencies. So some of the attributes here include reporting issues. So personnel report issues on a timely basis, hopefully. Evaluation of issues identified through monitoring. So deficiencies can be detected in the design, implementation, or operating effectiveness. And management decides what deficiencies to remediate. And then after that, management should take corrective actions, also hopefully on a timely basis. And that's it. We're at our final slide. So this is just kind of an overview of our 5 different components. And this says a journey traveled daily, intentional updates recommended annually. I like that. Any final thoughts?
Well, we need to be doing better on a number of fronts. We should be, as we've talked about, we need more policies, and we need to update some of the existing ones. And we need to get the compliance program up and running and do more monitoring. City Auditor's Office provides some of that, but if you look at all of our, pretty much every policy we have, it says that I'm supposed to evaluate every effectiveness of every policy on an annual basis and report to the CFO and to council, which hasn't been happening.
It's a big job.
So, but we need more resources.
Yeah, that's tough right now for everybody.
Yeah. I'm optimistic we'll get there. But, there are things that are happening. HR is in the process of reevaluating all the accounting series pay to see if it's really matches up with market. So that I get some extra money there, and I'm working on reclassifying positions and trying to get people more money that way. Because we need to be more competitive on a financial basis. And
Yeah, because if we're not properly staffed, then it can really touch on every single one of these.
Yeah. For sure.
All right, guys. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you all for joining us.